The stars shimmered like polished bone fragments scattered across the black void. Aboard the Orpheus 4, humanity's flagship for interstellar diplomacy, Ambassador Lisa therein adjusted her translation rig and peered through the observation window at the approaching vessel. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like something dredged from the deepest ocean trench. Organic, sprawling, tangled with what seemed like nerves or roots pulsing with blue light. "They're here early," said Commander Jules Rayner, the ship's security chief. He stood rigid, arms crossed, his eyes locked on the alien form. Not a good sign. Lisa said nothing. For 6 months they had prepared for this moment. The first face-to-face meeting with the Xalathuun, a species known only through intercepted signals and drifting artifacts. From what little the xenolinguists had deciphered, they were an ancient civilization older than Earth's written history, elusive, ritualistic, but willing to talk until today. She glanced at the data feed. The Xalathuun ship, designated Ember of Memory, had sent no greeting, no signal, not even a ping. It had simply emerged from a wormhole corridor, like a ghost swimming out of the folds of space-time, and now hovered in silence. Inside the diplomatic chamber, Dr. Calix Mendoza, the team's lead xenocultural analyst, finished uploading the preliminary symbol lexicon. His hands trembled as he interfaced with the console. "They're not transmitting because they're waiting," he murmured. "In their culture, silence isn't absence. It's anticipation." Anticipation of what? Rayner asked, one brow raised. "Exchange. Contact. We must go first." Lisa turned toward the diplomatic pod. It was a simple construct, an ovoid chamber designed for small, neutral interactions. No weapons. No armor. Only her, Calix, and the universal translator relay. As the pod detached from the Orpheus 4, Lisa felt the press of gravity ebb and the silence of space swallow the noise of her thoughts. They floated slowly toward the Ember of Memory, guided by magnetic anchors. Inside, Calix adjusted the atmospheric balance. "They don't breathe like we do. They interpret chemical gradients." She nodded. Every action mattered. Every detail was potential dialogue. When the pod docked with the Xalathuun vessel, its outer surface unfolded like a breathing lung, revealing an inner chamber of bioluminescent strands and translucent membranes. It pulsed with slow, rhythmic light, a kind of biological language. The walls seemed alive. One figure emerged. It moved like ink and water, semi-solid, tentacled, with a cluster of eyes arranged in an almost human pattern. It hovered inches above the ground, exuding an iridescent mist. Lisa stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, the alien paused. She opened her palm, the most universal of Earth's gestures. The handshake, not an offering, not a threat, a symbol of peace between strangers. It had ended wars, sealed treaties, and brought civilizations together. The Xalathuan's body recoiled like it had been electrocuted. Its light patterns went wild, spiking, flickering in sharp bursts like strobe lights in a thunderstorm. The chamber itself reacted, walls distorting, vibrating. The hum of the pod shifted into an almost scream. Calix reached for the console, frantically translating. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Lisa, pull back now." But it was too late. The Xalathuun emitted a shuddering pulse that struck the pod with sonic force. Lisa staggered. The alien vanished into the membrane, and the docking ring detached violently. They were expelled from the Ember of Memory, as if rejected by a living organism. Back aboard the Orpheus 4, chaos reigned. The Ember had disappeared within moments. Not cloaked, gone. Warped out of existence without warning, without farewell. "Report," barked Rayner as the pod returned. "They think we declared war," Calix said, his voice flat, hollow. "I showed them death." Hours later, a transmission arrived. Fragmented, static-laced, a looped sequence of images and emotions, broadcast through wavelengths no human tech had ever recorded. They played in the briefing room, trying to decode its intent. The images were clear in their horror. A world burning. Creatures similar to Xalathuun, but younger, disintegrated by fire. Giant machines with hand-like appendages searing forests and skies. Tentacled children vaporized in flashes of light. Then, in the center of it all, an open palm, human-like, glowing white, reaching forward. The loop ended. The room remained silent. They remember, Calyx said, the gesture is not peace. It's extinction. Someone, something like us, did this to them before. You're saying we reminded them of genocide? Lisa's voice was barely audible. Not reminded, Calyx replied. Reenacted. They saw your hand and thought it was beginning again. 3 hours after message, a mining colony on Europa went dark. 14 minutes later, a research relay in the Kuiper Belt exploded. 16 hours later, Earth Command issued an emergency communication blackout, fearing panic. No declaration of war. No demands. Only silence. And then death. Rayner stood in the observation deck, arms still crossed, but his posture had changed. Less rigid. More resigned. We thought we were ready, he said. Lisa didn't respond. She stared into the void where the ember of memory had once been. Somewhere out there, a race was mobilizing, not against who humans were, but who they once resembled. A mistake as simple as a gesture had unlocked a buried terror older than Earth itself. We didn't just open our hand, she said quietly. We opened a wound. Far below, Earth's blue glow remained untouched for now, spinning innocently beneath layers of clouds and oceans and ignorance. But the stars had seen something different, something ancient and angry now awake once more. And it had remembered. Calyx Mendoza stared into the amber-lit chamber, a cocoon of screens and floating glyphs, each one pulsing in an unfamiliar rhythm. He hadn't slept since the encounter, but he couldn't stop. He was the only one aboard the Orpheus who believed the war hadn't begun out of hatred. It had begun out of memory. The Xalathuun weren't attacking randomly. Every strike had a pattern: cultural beacons, exploration archives, ancient signal arrays. They were not trying to conquer. They were trying to erase something, to cauterize the echo of a trauma too deep to explain. He leaned forward, fingers trembling as he activated the neural inference algorithm. The AI stitched together fragments of Xalathuun data from the initial broadcast: chemical pulses, luminescent expressions, harmonic waveforms embedded with emotional resonance. Come on, he muttered, as if the alien language could be bullied into coherence. Lisa therein entered without knocking. Her voice, quieter than usual, pulled him from the trance. You found something. Calyx nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen. Not language. Not like we know it. Their meaning isn't tied to words or sounds. It's biological. A chemical lexicon built on emotion, on memory. They don't speak. They relive. The main display shimmered and reshaped, revealing a reconstructed memory, one transmitted to them when the Xalathuun reacted to the handshake. This was no diplomatic message. It was a scream. In a projection, a world loomed, teeming with pale forests and spindle towers of iridescent resin. Then shadows blotted the sky. Machines descended like gods of metal and fire, each one bearing appendages like hands, five-pronged and grasping, twisting. The destruction was precise, ritualistic, genocidal, the most harrowing image. A Xalathuun parent, trying to protect its brood, tentacles curled around its young. A massive hand descended, fingers spread, glowing, and everything turned to ash. They have a myth, Calyx said, an extinction myth, the open hand of final memory. To them, it's not a gesture welcome. It's the last thing they saw before their ancestors were annihilated. Lisa stared, cold anger tightening her features. You're saying someone else made contact before us? Or something similar enough, Calyx said. Something they never forgot. Commander Rayner's voice broke through on the intercom. We've got incoming. Not an attack. Something else. Small vessel, drifting toward us from the outer ring. It's broadcasting an unknown code. Lisa looked at Calyx. Could be a response. Or bait, he replied, but he was already standing. They reached the docking bay within minutes. The vessel was unlike anything in the Terran fleet, an obsidian capsule webbed in glistening strands that twitched and pulsed like veins. No weapons, no propulsion system. It had simply appeared. Rayner met them in the bay, hand on his sidearm. You sure about this? No, Lisa said, stepping forward. But we need to understand what we did, and why they're still listening. The capsule opened not with a hiss, but a sound like a sigh. Inside lay a semi-solid sphere, floating midair. It throbbed gently, exuding faint light and motes of biotic mist. Kalix stepped closer, translator rig tuned to Xalathuun resonances. "It's not a message," he whispered. "It's a memory core." The room dimmed. A pulse emitted from the sphere, washing over them like a wave. Kalix stumbled but didn't fall. His eyes glazed. He wasn't aboard the Orpheus 4 anymore. He stood in a hall of light and roots. Xalathuan figures moved around him, not with hostility, but ceremony. He felt their emotions as his own: suspicion, fear, and a deeper, older grief. They weren't showing him history. They were showing him religion, myth. The memory shape resolved into a story. Xalathuan had once reached across galaxies, welcoming other races with shared neural communion. But one species, unidentified, silent, with grasping limbs, betrayed them. No warning, no negotiation, just fire and extermination. In the end, the survivors encoded their trauma into genetic memory. Every generation was born remembering the open hand. Every child taught that if the hand returned, it must be silenced. Forever. Kalix awoke, gasping. Lisa steadied him. "What did they show you?" "Everything," he said, blinking tears from his eyes. "To them, we are the second coming of the destroyers. The hand of death returned in flesh. They didn't want war. They wanted to stop the cycle before it began again." Raynor stared at the capsule. "So what's this?" "A warning." Kalix shook his head. "No, it's a question." He turned to Lisa. "They're asking, can we change the ending?" Hours passed. The sphere was secured in an isolation field, and the crew resumed cautious scans of surrounding space. No additional vessels appeared. No attacks. Just silence, deep and vast, broken only by the occasional whisper of star wind against hull plating. Lisa returned to her quarters and played the recording again, the moment of the handshake, slowed to a crawl. Her hand, rising gently, palm open, fingers outstretched, and the alien flinching as if struck. How many times had that same gesture healed wounds on Earth? Resolved disputes, reunited families? The idea that it could mean death was unthinkable. But they didn't share ideas. They shared pain. She opened her hand again, alone in the dark, watching it with strange new horror. How many other things had humanity brought into the stars, unknowingly soaked in blood? They had trained for diplomacy, for language, cultural variance, even xenopsychology. But they hadn't trained for trauma. They hadn't trained for the deep, generational wounds of an alien soul. The door chimed. Kalix stepped in, face pale but alert. They responded. She stood. "What do they want?" His voice was quiet, reverent. "They want us to remember, too." The file they sent was vast, encrypted in emotion, not logic. But the meaning was clear. The next meeting would not be words. It would not be gestures. It would be memories shared directly, through a biosynthetic link. No translators. No misunderstanding. Only truth. And if they failed to carry that truth, the stars would burn again. The chamber had been prepared in silence, not out of reverence, but out of necessity. Every sound felt intrusive, every word premature. Lisa stood in the center of the neural communion suite aboard the Orpheus 4, encased in an exosuit wired for synaptic overlap. Her mind braced for the unknown. The Xalathuan memory core pulsed at the heart of the room, suspended in magnetic stasis. This was not a diplomatic table. It was a crucible. Kalix adjusted the final interface node on her collar. His fingers moved with precision, but his face betrayed uncertainty. "This isn't like anything we've ever done. It's not translation, it's integration. You're not just going to see their thoughts. You're going to feel them, be them." Lisa didn't blink. "That's the point." From the observation deck, Raynor watched without speaking. He'd opposed this from the beginning, not out of fear of the aliens, but of what Lisa might lose in exchange. The risks weren't technical. They were existential. When the sequence initiated, Lisa inhaled, bracing herself. The room faded. Her own breath disappeared. Her body ceased to matter. She fell, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, through layers of memory that weren't her own. She felt herself unravel, consciousness stretching and reforming in the shape of another species' experience. Time lost meaning. Space collapsed inward. She awoke in a forest of light. The air shimmered with refracted color, the trees pulsing gently with bioluminescence. She felt her limbs, alien and soft, flowing rather than solid. Tentacles moved without conscious command. She wasn't Lisa there and here. She was a child of the Xalathuun. Emotion struck her in waves. Wonder, curiosity, the deep ancestral harmony of being connected to all others around her. There was no loneliness here, only communal breath and shared dreams. She felt memories ripple through her from nearby entities, parents, siblings, mentors. Memory wasn't recorded. It was inherited. Then came the fracture. The sky turned red. Dark shapes descended, angular, inorganic. Lisa saw them as Xalathuun had seen them. Aberrations, angular monstrosities with cold, grasping limbs. They didn't speak. They didn't pause. The world burned in silence. She felt the searing pain of neural disconnection. Thousands of consciousnesses severed in an instant, leaving echoes in their place. The children screamed not from injury, but from the sudden absence of every familiar thought. Lisa was ripped from the network. Alone, the final image was a hand. Not hers, but human-shaped, open, pale, framed by fire and ash. She broke the connection with a convulsion. The chamber reeled around her, as if trying to remember its own shape. Calyx caught her before she hit the floor, but she was already gasping, disoriented, sobbing. It wasn't just trauma, she whispered. It was obliteration of identity. Raynor entered, frowning. Then they're justified in seeing us as a threat. No, Lisa snapped, wiping her face. They're terrified. We remind them of an extinction they've never stopped reliving. But they sent this memory voluntarily. They want us to know. That means they haven't given up on peace. Calyx's expression was grim. Not yet, but their fleet just exited subspace on the edge of Saturn's orbit. They're not cloaked, Raynor added. They're making themselves visible. Lisa steadied herself. A test. They're watching how we respond. And if we respond wrong? Calyx asked. Then they relive the end, she said. But for us this time. Earth Command wanted an immediate show of force. Standard doctrine in the face of unidentified threats. Battleships were rerouting from Jupiter, orbital cannons charging. But Lisa knew that any human weapon fired in fear would only confirm the Xalathuan's worst belief, that history was not a cycle, but a trap. She opened a secure channel to Admiral Solon of Earth Command. The man's image flickered into view, framed by the dark steel of a war room and lit by emergency amber. We have no idea what they're planning, he growled. You're asking us to gamble the solar system on guesswork. No, I'm asking you to gamble on trust, Lisa replied, voice steady. They gave us memory, not a threat. They are waiting for a sign that we won't become the destroyers again. Solon scoffed. What sign do they expect? We already offered peace. Lisa shook her head. We offered it in our language. Not theirs. Not in memory. He stared for a long moment, then ended the feed without a word. The next hours crawled by, every second a countdown. The Xalathuan fleet remained in perfect formation, unmoving, unblinking, like a constellation assembled with intent. They hadn't powered weapons. They hadn't attempted contact. They were waiting. Lisa stood on the main deck of the Orpheus 4, watching the stars shift. Calyx stood beside her, arms folded, the sphere pulsed faintly in its case, a last remnant of the communion. They didn't come here to invade, he said. They came to see if we've learned. And have we? Lisa asked, not turned to face him. He didn't answer. A soft ping echoed from the console. New transmission. Not Xalathuan, but human-coded. From the surface of Titan Station, an old outpost abandoned after resource depletion. A single message. They're here. The feed showed a lone Xalathuan figure descending onto the frozen plain. No escort, no guards. Just a traveler, waiting. Lisa turned from the screen. Prepare the shuttle. Rayner stepped forward. That could be a trap. It's a question, she corrected. And this time, we need to answer in their language. Her decision was final. She would go, alone. As the shuttle broke atmosphere, a silence settled over the crew. The stars watched, mute and ancient. Lisa closed her eyes. She wasn't just carrying humanity's hopes anymore. She was carrying memory. The wind on Titan was a slow whisper, barely enough to stir the frozen particles clinging to the desolate ground. Lisa stepped from the shuttle, her boots sinking into the faint crunch of nitrogen ice. The planet's thin atmosphere, filtered through her suit systems, gave the illusion of silence, yet her heart pounded with thunderous clarity. In the distance, the Xalathuun envoy waited, not a ship, not a warrior, but a single figure standing still beneath the pale shimmer of Saturn's looming presence. It was tall, sinuous, its translucent skin catching the starlight like glass submerged in moonlit water. It wore no armor, carried no tools. It had no need. The memory it bore was its weapon and its offering both. Lisa approached, stopping a respectful 10 meters away. Her helmet HUD blinked with signals, neural echoes radiating from the being like an ocean tide brushing the edges of her mind. The communion hadn't begun yet, but it was close. Her voice cracked softly over the suit's external speakers. I'm here, alone by choice. The Xalathuun rippled in acknowledgement. No words, no gestures, just a faint shift in color and heat. It was not merely acknowledging her presence. It was listening to her emotion, her tension, her honesty. She took one breath and deactivated the external suit protocols. It was a calculated risk. Vulnerability as a message, an open gesture, but not the open hand. That symbol was gone, discarded, too dangerous, too misunderstood. Instead, she pressed a palm to her own chest and bowed her head. The Xalathuun responded. It extended a limb, not a hand, but a thread-like filament woven with organic bioluminescence, and touched the ice between them. The ground lit up, forming a circular cradle of soft light. Lisa stepped into it, and memory opened. It wasn't like the previous connection, forceful, overwhelming. This time, the alien mind unfolded with patience. It shared, not pushed. Images flowed like dreams. The birth of colony, the touch of sibling minds merging into one harmonic pulse, the terror of fire falling from a black sky. Then something new, a question. The memories shifted, presenting a version of Earth's Handshake, this time reversed. The Xalathuun figure, in ancient times, reaching out with tentacles gently coiled, trying to understand. A human-like shape recoiling in horror, raising a hand not in greeting but in defense. The connection shattered. War followed. It wasn't humanity that had first destroyed them. It was misunderstanding. The Xalathuun had misread the gesture of defense as a declaration of war. They had struck first, generations ago, believing they were retaliating. Their own memory had betrayed them. Lisa gasped. The myth was not a being destroyed. It was a destroying, and carrying the guilt in their blood. The figure in front of her shimmered. Shame radiated in waves, thick and bitter. Their genetic inheritance wasn't just fear. It was grief. They had been waiting all these centuries not for vengeance, but for someone to see the whole truth. Lisa sank to her knees. We both remember wrong, she said softly. We both need to rewrite it. The communion flared brighter. This time, the Xalathuun did not give memory. They invited her in. Lisa's mind merged. She was in a hall again, but this one was new. Not a relic, not a ruin. A space built for dialogue, assembled from pieces of both cultures. Terran alloys braided with living resin. Light panels glowing in Xalathuun hues. There were voices, hers, Calyx's, the Admiral's, translated into vibration, emotion, scent. She stood in a chamber of negotiation shaped from memory itself. The envoy stood beside her, no longer singular. Others had joined, flowing into the shared mind space, witnessing, not judging, waiting. She spoke without words. We remember you now, and you remember us. Images followed, carefully chosen, carefully felt. The warmth of Earth's sun, the laughter of children beneath trees. Hands not raised in war but cupped in prayer. She showed them hospitals. Refugees. Art, not perfection, but intention. The Xalathuun responded. Their past was not buried, but it could be reframed. The communion ended slowly, like a breath exhaled over a winter field. The light faded from the ice. The Titan wind returned. The envoy lowered its head, tendrils folding gently inward. An agreement. No treaty. No signatures. Just memory, reshaped. As Lisa returned to the shuttle, a stream of messages filled the comms. Calix's voice broke through first. We saw it. The pulse from Titan. The Xalathuan ships. They're dispersing, not attacking. They're aligning with us. She smiled, exhausted. They're giving us a chance, she said. A pause. For what? Calix asked. Lisa stared out at the frozen horizon. Saturn's rings stretched wide above. To stop making first contact with fear. Back aboard the Orpheus 4, Raynor met her at the dock. He didn't speak, just nodded as she passed. The crew didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They listened. They understood something had shifted. Not just in diplomacy, but in them. The universe hadn't become safer, but it had become possible. Later, alone in her quarters, Lisa played the memory one last time. Not through tech, but within. The feeling of shared sorrow, shared responsibility. The raw vulnerability of the species that had once lashed out in fear, only to long for connection in the silence afterward. She opened her hand, not as a symbol to give, but as one to let go.